Okay, hi, welcome to our June Roundtable. And I can't believe it's been half a year. We've been doing this, and we're glad that you've joined us, and we pray that the efforts have been fruitful, as fruitful for you as it has been for us. And of course, this month, our articles, we've had three articles on, above all, taking up the shield of faith. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about faith. And if you've read some of the articles, I began my article this month with a statement made in our Ephesians text that above all, we are to take up the shield of faith. John, the disciple who Jesus loved so, in one of his later letters, 1 John, the 5th chapter, verse 4, tells us that faith is the victory that has overcome the world. And in our lives, surely it is our faith, what we believe, that provides the confidence and the foundation for the commitment and activity of our daily lives. And as we've noted this month, Hebrews 11 tells us it is faith that is credited with the offering of the most excellent sacrifices, the godly fear that saved a household, in Noah's sake, the obedience to do hard and unthinkable things and to follow hard and unthinkable instruction, the belief in the provided assurances of the things not yet seen or realized, the hope in what we cannot see or comprehend, and the ability to forsake the pleasures and the glories of this world in order to humbly serve in a kingdom whose king is not visible to us on this earth. We're told of the judges and the kings who through faith subdued kingdoms and worked righteousness, obtained promises, and stopped the mouths of lions. They quenched the violence of fire. They escaped the edge of the sword, and out of weakness they were made strong. They became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. And as we know these passages so well, we know that they're so full of the good news of faith and what is possible for us in the faith that we discuss here and that we live in our lives. And so it can be easily established that what we believe, what we have faith in, what we anchor our lives and decisions in is essential for us overcoming the world, the darts, the wounds, the hurdles and temptations and trials that Satan hurls at us. In fact, as we've mentioned in the articles this month, that it's our shield that when it's used correctly will be, when it's maintained and it's positioned well, it will be that first line of defense to keep our other armor more protected. And so it's easy to understand the 12 disciples when they were speaking with the Lord and they were struggling to overcome what they thought this obstacle was of how difficult it would be to diligently keep the intentions of the gospel law. You know, when Jesus had been talking to them about forgiveness, and they noted how hard some of the sayings of Jesus were, that they must cling to that righteousness of God, which we talked about 2 months ago in Jillian's month, clinging to not our own righteousness, but the righteousness of God, that it is through faith that we are able to do that. Luke 17 and verses 5 and 6, we witness the struggle of the disciples as they ask Jesus to increase their faith, increase our faith. And of course, the Lord's answer was so wonderful for us to hear too. If you have faith as a mustard seed, you can say to the mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted by the sea, and it would obey you. And of course, his point is not that we can go around uprooting trees. And, you know, I think about that. If you had the faith that you needed to, you could move mountains. You know, it's not a miraculous or magical power that's discussed in these conversations. It's the simple truth that in faith, we believe in the power and the promises of God. That whatever is within God's plan and realm of activity in our lives and for us and what is best, that we trust. It's another word tied very closely to faith, the covenant that is illogical at times. the definition of greatness and joy, which is not one that is defined the way the world would define it. And Jesus teaches us repeatedly that if we have that kind of faith, we can overcome the philosophies, the promises, and the lure of the world, that our hearts will rest in the faith in God. And Jesus commended faith in many, in the poor, in the sorrowful, in the Gentiles. You know, he commends the faith of the Gentiles in the brokenhearted. It was the faith that many times attributed to the healing and the remedies, both physical and spiritual, in the text of the inspired world. It really is our anchor. Amy, I'm going to start with you because I think a deep-rooted faith in the promises of God is imperative if we are to instill that same faith in our children. You know, in the very true sense, our faith and belief provides us with the fundamental trust that directs our life, that we trust, which is a very similar word in many ways, that what God says is right and is accurate, and that is the best way. In 2 Kings 18, when speaking of Hezekiah's faith in the Lord, and I think you're going to talk more about that, the question of what he trusted is questioned. It's mentioned 7 times in that chapter alone. He trusted in the Lord in verse 5, God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among the kings of Judah, nor were there none before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him. He kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. The Lord was with him, and he prospered wherever he went. It is noted in verse 5 that he trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that there were none like him. We're told in verse 19 that that trust was questioned even by the king of Assyria. That when Rabshakeh, I don't know how to say it, said to them, say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what confidence is this that you have trust in which you trust? You speak of having plans and power of war, but they're mere words. In whom do you trust that you should rebel against me? He trusted to establish his courage, his actions, his strength to resist the world around him. And it is certain that people of Judah did not agree with him, nor did they have the faith within them to put their trust in God. And how important is it to have that faith and that trust that what the Lord says is good and right, that we can put that in our confidence and faith in the guidance and the promises of God concerning what it is that we do for our children. When our children cannot, because they do not understand. They cannot have the same trust as us because they are not at the same maturity level as us. I think it's easy for our faith to falter when our children have opportunities to trust in themselves and in the world, because I think it's easy for us to begin to do that as well. So Amy, I'm going to let you take that question.
So I don't feel adequate for this question, but I can kind of rely back on my parents, right? And other parents that I've known that have been successful in raising children, maintaining their faith and instilling faith in their kids. I think for me, definitely having kids has been a test to my faith, honestly, because I believe we're surrounded in this world with a lot of messages that are the exact opposite of what God would have us to do. So quite frankly, even as I put my kids in school, right, I would find myself relying on that institution, right, to think that's what I need to have a successful child, right? I mean, they need to make good grades and they need to act in a certain way. And when you really, really boil it down, you think, well, no, they wouldn't need any of that, quite frankly, to be a good Christian. But that's really hard to let go of in a culture when that's being pushed and that's being told to you. And I cannot speak for fathers, but I can speak for mothers, especially this mother, that I think there's pressure that's often given to mothers as well, that other mothers push on, right? That we start to compare and contrast our kids and compare and contrast how we're doing as moms. But we're doing it not against the word of God, right? We're doing it against this worldly standard to say, well, how many things are your kids in, right? Or are they successful at this? To me, that's dangerous. That's dangerous territory. And really what's scary about it is it starts to send a dangerous message to our children too, right? Because it's telling them that, no, there's not just this one standard, the Lord's standard, there's multiple standards, right? And you need to live up to all of those. And I think that's scary. So in order to combat that, you really have to get solid in your faith and understand what is the most important thing. And I think one of the ways you communicate that down to your children, at least for my parents, the way they communicated that to us was they lived it. It wasn't enough to just say that they believed and that they did or that they loved God and they trusted him. They lived that life. So I link it a lot to James, that when James says, hey, just saying, oh, I'm so sorry you're cold, right? Go and be warm. That's not enough, right? You give the person a jacket, you put them in front of a fire. He's trying to say that it's not enough to just spout, right? Your beliefs. You have to live your beliefs. And that became very clear in the way my parents acted and the things that they found priorities, not only for themselves, but how they would set up the priorities for our whole family. I'll give one little example. I can remember the first time I tried to get out of going to church because I hadn't properly studied for a test. So just so you guys know, I was very, I was motivated by grades. So I really found that important. And I tried to talk to my dad about it, and he said, well, that's your problem. You didn't use your time wisely. You're going to church, right? So there wasn't a question in his mind. And yeah, I think he cared somewhat about my grades, but I'll tell you what, he cared less about my grades than he cared about me going and gaining encouragement from other Christians. So my point about that is really to just give an example that we set a precedence for our kids, and we even set what we think is important and who we're putting our trust in. And particularly when I look at Hezekiah, I'll be honest, I'm in my daily Bible reading right now. I'm in the midst of all these kings. And, I think what's fascinating about Hezekiah is that he was such an amazing king, and his son that followed after him was not. However, when you read Manasseh's story, something interesting happens at the end of it, and it's that he repents. And I can't help but wonder if there was just something hanging on that he knew about his father. I don't know, right? I can never tell you exactly. But I also think so much of what Hezekiah lived, the exact verses you were talking about, Liz, that happened before Manasseh's time, right? He didn't get to see the level of dedication and trust that Hezekiah put in the Lord. The other thing I wanted to just think about too is I've always wondered so much, that they'll compare everything back to David, and even statements made like, David did what was right in my eyes, right? The Lord would say that. And I'll be honest, if you read David's life, there's a lot he didn't do right. But I think the one thing David maintained that I believe what maybe God is referencing is he never lost trust in the Lord. That is one thing that seemed to remain consistent for David, that he wasn't leading the whole country astray into works of idolatry and saying, hey, let's go try this other route now. He was constantly coming back to God. And even when he was confronted with his sin, he repented for it and said, yeah, you're right. I've sinned against the Lord. So he seemed to have that link down more than any other king had that down. And, you can't help but see some of that then transferring to Solomon, which we won't get into all of even Solomon's quirks or issues, but clearly Solomon wrote a ton of Proverbs. He ended a book in Ecclesiastes saying that the one thing that mattered was to remember the Lord. So I guess what I would say is, as we're raising our children, if we can remember that, they will see that. Right now, they still have free will. They can do what they want, and we can't control that, because I think the other piece of this trust that's really hard as a parent is also saying, I can't control this soul, right? I have to open up my arms and give them to the Lord. That's what I'm doing. Now I'm going to live my life as well as I can, but at the end of the day, I can't force a love and faith for the Lord, right? I have to allow God to love and and guide them, right? And I do my best on earth, but I'm a person. And so I'm making lots of mistakes. But I think that's really hard, is that we have to put our trust that God is doing what's best for them as well. And that can be hard and difficult. But the more we ground our faith, I think the more that we can do that. And I think the best example of that in the Bible is Job, that he had 7 of his children taken away in one shot, and he still praised the Lord's name. He was still able to recognize that he could trust God and that God knew what was best for him. So I think if we can look to that example, even to say, we can't I think there are parents, right, that we put all of our hope and love in our children. And if something like that were to happen, what would happen to your faith? And that doesn't mean you don't love them. It's quite the opposite. It means that you have a higher respect and love for God, and you recognize he has your best intention, right? He is what is going to hold you together, right? Not your children. That's probably the best I can say and offer.
I think that's great. And I think you're exactly right. And I will tell you that in my lifetime, I've seen women and men who have faltered in their own faith, like I said, because their children's faith has been compromised, and their children have not seen the value of having faith and trust in God. And I think it can be a real quicksand of a place to be for a parent, unless that parent just knows this is absolutely what I believe. And I will tell you what happens to the child. The only hope of a child coming back is for them to witness you holding firm to that faith. So that's great, Amy. I agree. And I think that that's exactly right. It begins with our faith. It begins with our faith, how we deal with our children's faith. So we have to know who we are. We got a bunch of women and men who are trying to teach their kids who to be, but they don't know who they are. And so it's impossible to teach something that you don't know yourself. So Jillian, we discussed your topic, the breastplate that we wear, that of righteousness, in March, like I alluded to a little bit earlier. You were the editor that month, and I know you've thought a lot about righteousness because of that. Because anytime you teach or are responsible for the material, you spend a lot more of your time thinking. So, we're told by Paul in his letter to the Romans in chapter 1, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just or righteous shall live by faith." So can you talk a little bit about how the understanding of the righteousness of God, not our own righteousness, but the righteousness of God, is seen in the lives of those who live by faith? When we live our lives by
what does it look like?
faith.
Yeah.
If it is not our own righteousness that we rely on, but the righteousness of God that defines us and is displayed, how does your faith in him lead us to live by faith in, that we might be defined by that righteousness of God?
Mm-hmm. So there are so many examples in the Bible of where it says what you guys alluded to earlier of he did that which was right at the sight of the Lord, or so and so walked with God. So I feel like, again, we know right there that our faith produces something. We're supposed to be doing something. So what did these people do? And what can we do? Like, what does walking righteously with God actually look like? Which, by the way, I feel like you gave me a very hard topic. So whatever, go ahead and just sum up the Bible and how we're supposed to act. Anyways, so what does living in faith look like every day? What does this shield look like by us doing these things? How does this help produce a shield of faith? So we pray. So in James 5:16, the prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. So that's one thing we do. We run towards God. Proverbs 18:10, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it and is safe. We walk with integrity. Proverbs 20:27, the just man walketh in his integrity. So again, every day you're walking in your integrity, and his children are blessed after him. Our mind, we think about godly things. Again, we all know these verses. Philippians 4:8-9. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. So again, these are what we're thinking and what we're doing. Again, I feel like is helping. Again, it's not our shield, but it is our faith that is helping to produce this shield. It dictates how we interact with others. Ephesians 4:31-32. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander to be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. And so again, our faith produces all of these actions. And again, we see this all throughout Hebrews 11. Basically everyone that they mention is by faith, then they did something. And so again, our actions do not produce our righteousness, but our faith in God's righteousness dictates, I feel like, how we are supposed to be walking with God. And again, in turn, it helps to produce that shield around us. So anyways, that's what I had in a nutshell,
I think
how we're supposed to live.
Exactly. Well, and having that faith, it is such a huge conversation. I mean, it is really what defines you live as if you believe something. Yeah. In my article, I said one of my dad's sayings to us when we were young is there's no such thing as an agnostic. People live their lives as if they believe something. All of us do. Nobody gets to live a life where they don't believe. They believe something.
You're something.
Yeah. So, exactly. Yeah. And
and our belief should produce these things. And again,
because we believe
in those things that I sat there and said, that does produce a shield around us if we are doing those types of things. So anyways, like you said, the first line of defense. So
yeah, that's right. Okay, great. Let me get to Randy here. So Randy, it is impossible for faith not to be a part of our disappointments in life. If we're to find joy and patience, even when we find ourselves in circumstances that we do not anticipate or expect. And so surely it is the shield that helps us to defend ourselves against the broken dreams and relationships, the disappointments, the unexpected circumstances of this world. While deeply believing in the hope of salvation, we're looking someplace else because we believe in that. To have faith that will sustain us in the midst of possible relationship and geographical, financial, child-rearing changes and disappointments, it's a challenge for everybody. At the beginning of the passage that we referred to at the beginning of the discussion today, in 1 John 5, verses 4-5, we're told, for whatever is born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? But in reality, that's hard. It's always hard. How does that focus on the eternal promise written about again by John in Revelation in chapter 3, verse 5, when he says, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before the angels. How does that all play into how we deal with disappointments and unexpected circumstances in our lives?
I hope I answered your question. I wrote a bunch of stuff down this morning. Actually, I was reading something recently about disappointment, and it said that people deal with all disappointment the exact same way. The only thing that's different is the recovery time. But it can be as small as like you look forward all day to a donut and you get to the donut store and it's closed. That's a disappointment. To even like losing someone you love, or you guys talked about when children lose their faith, but I think also faith shaking would be someone that you have always looked up to and they lose their faith. That's really hard also. And so all of these things are the same emotion, evidently, and our brains process it the same. It's just at a different speed, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so I think if we look at disappointments in our lives, understanding that all disappointments are not the same level and don't take the same, but it's the same emotions, I think no one is safe from disappointments. Everybody is disappointed, even children are disappointed. I think we come into the world crying like, oh, instantly disappointed in how cold the world is. So I was sort of thinking about how I think God set us up with different things to help us when dealing with disappointments. I know I wrote about infertility, and I think that's a really large disappointment that a lot of women deal with. And I said in my article, I hope the article wasn't snarky. I'd like to just go on record to say it wasn't meant to be snarky. So, but it's a very real feeling, and it's how a lot of women have felt. And I felt very alone. I know I said that. But I think that's why we're given our brothers and sisters when it talks about bearing each other's burdens. It's not just like helping each other through spiritual weakness, although I think it is, but it's also when all of these things are hard for us, we can come together, we can share with each other. And for the bigger things, I mean, Christians are not safe from disappointment. We are separated from our God in this earth. And so we're going to have disappointments. That's what sin is. It's just this constant disappointment. I think the obvious answer is to look for examples in the scriptures. And so like Amy was, Liz, you brought up Hezekiah, but also like David and all of these things. We read the Psalms, we understand like he was in the depths of despair, like he was an emotional dude. Like he went through all of it. If you're feeling emotional, David did it. If you're upset about things, with the infertility article, I talked about all these women. Like we're not alone. There have been tons of people who've done that. Anything that we've gone through in this earth, for the most part, I mean, with the exception of Hebrews 11, it's Hebrews 11. Yeah, Hebrews 11. I mean, what made their faith amazing is that they were going through something that no one had ever been through before. Like no one had ever been through the flood. That's what made Noah's faith amazing. And I think it's really interesting to look at the difference. I always thought it was interesting in Luke 1, Gabriel goes to Zechariah and he tells him John the Baptist is coming, and he goes to Mary and he says, Jesus is coming. And they both ask, how are you going to do this? And for a long time, I thought it was weird that Zechariah got in trouble and Mary didn't. But Zechariah had examples of it. We had all of these old people getting knocked up and having babies. Zechariah really should have known, right? But for Mary, who was a virgin, it was the first time that it had ever happened. And so what a great faith. And so I think even in Hebrews 11, even if we can't find that exact example of something that's happening in our lives, it has happened to other people and they've made it through. And we see in Hebrews 11 so many people who really were the first to experience things. So I think that's the obvious answer. For sure, because we're going to hit harder and harder disappointments. I mean, since the infertility, we've hit much harder things. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And, it is true. And I mean, we're told that there is no temptation that will be given that men haven't already experienced and been through, that there are that circumstances of life and disappointments in life and hardships in life and broken hearts and all of those things have been experienced by others. And so, and while Noah had not experienced a flood, I mean, nobody had experienced a flood before, people had their faith tested before. And so all of us have to trust that God is the answer to all of that. So yeah, I think so. So Lee, obviously you being the oldest one among the other four, obviously faith can change. It can mature, it can weaken. And it grows as our lives are continually changing and challenging us to be better, to be wiser, to be more kind, to be more patient, to be more diligent. And I think that's a scriptural principle. Mm-hmm. But even as faith is challenged, it is faith that preserves us. As David tells us in Psalm 16 and verse 1, preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust. It is what preserved David. In Psalms 31 and 23, David sings, "Oh, love the Lord, all you his saints, for the Lord preserves the faithful." Mm-hmm. And in Acts 14 and verse 22, the description of Paul's efforts in building strong congregations, we're told that Paul strengthened the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith and saying, we must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God. And Paul also notes in Acts 20 that both the Jews and the Greeks had all been purified in heart by faith. And so it is then a faith that is built upon a knowledge of grace and salvation and the resurrection of our Lord. I love Paul's closing words in Corinthians in his first letter to them. He says, watch, stand fast in faith, be brave, and be strong. And then in his following communication to them, and the second letter, he reminds them of the changes of their faith that must be expected and are essential in order for them to increase in their faith. So to this point in your life, mm-hmm. how have you continued to ensure growth and maturity and strength in your faith?
Well, I think certainly our faith is a constantly changing state of being, really, a mental state of being. It's not stagnant. We can see that in the examples that the girls have all used in the biblical examples. And we see multiple people in the Bible having a crisis of faith, making the wrong decisions, with the exception of Jesus, of course. We see it in almost every person we meet. I immediately, when I think about faith and the way faith changes and grows and matures, I think about the apostles, the disciples and the apostles primarily. In Matthew 8, it's one of the most incredible events in the New Testament when Jesus calms the sea. And of course, his disciples have just seen some amazing things. Jesus has healed a man of leprosy. He has spoken, and the centurion's servant is healed. He's healed Peter's mother-in-law, for heaven's sakes. He's cast out demons with a word. He's healed the sick and the lame, and they've seen it all. And yet when they're in the middle of the storm and they're afraid and they wake him up, he rebukes them for their lack of faith. And they turn to each other and say, what manner of man is this? They know who he is. But their faith isn't what it should be. And it's not what it will be. And I think ours just isn't either sometimes. I think when we think about the question of faith, one thing that I think of is that faith is it is a very personal manifestation of a fervent commitment to our belief. I mean, all of those things are part and parcel of it. As you said, trust and faith are certainly intermingled, and belief is part of that, but it's not all of it. And it's the action that comes. But in that way, it's an individual reaction or decision about the evidence we see of Christ's lordship. But the things that, when I think about the things that have caused growth and maturity in my faith, most of them, they are often in relation to other people, relationships that I have in my life. And I just start thinking, I think faith is contagious in some ways. And I think that's one of the reasons that the scriptures tell us over and over and over to be with each other, to love each other, to be present at the assembly, and to prefer each other. You think about, we've named some great examples already, but you think about Barak. He doesn't want to go into a battle without Deborah. Deborah's faith, her faith encourages his faith to go and fight. And Moses wanted Aaron by his side. Aaron's presence and faith deeply impact Moses' own faith. Naomi had Ruth. Esther has Mordecai. The 12 have each other. And, Randy mentioned, I was thinking about, you think about after Judas betrays Jesus, it would have shaken that group to its core. It must have. It does us when it's disastrous and shocking for us, when someone that we have loved dearly and depended on and been comforted by and possibly been guided by, that we've leaned on, when that one leaves the faith, it is devastating. It can feel totally devastating, and Judas had been one of them. And yet, even with that great loss, they're all going to be together on the day of Pentecost. And even though it's going to be Peter who delivers the sermon, they're all there speaking in tongues. I just think that in order to mature and grow in our faith, we need to be among the faithful. We're told to know each other, to cry with each other, as Randy was saying, to rejoice with each other, bear each other's burdens. God gives us those of the household of faith as a great blessing. He provides us with family where we may not have family otherwise. And when we reject those relationships, or we don't make them a priority, then we are rejecting one of his great blessings, I believe, that will bolster our faith and encourage us. There are always going to be things that challenge us, our ability to be together. But as with anything else in life, we do exactly what we want to do. And if we desire each other and we prefer each other, then there isn't much that can keep us from each other. I've talked to several people over the course of the past couple of years in the situation that has occurred about the challenges of being separated from each other in the worship service and even in fellowship, in social fellowship. And of course, now there's the issue of getting people back to services in many places. We haven't been immune to that here because all of a sudden worship has become more convenient and comfortable. And that can be a blow to our faith. Our faith should be uncomfortable sometimes. It should cause us to be without comfort in the service of others. We desperately need to be together. I know I need to be around people who are thinking spiritual thoughts and want to have spiritual conversations, because that helps my focus as well. And I think about our families on earth, and my family, of course, my earthly family is a bolster for me in those ways as well. That's true. I've certainly been blessed by my family connections. But even if that were not true, I have been given a family who I love dearly and who challenge me and push me and encourage me. And I just think, how can our faith not grow if we're around others who have faith? If we allow ourselves simply to occupy space on a pew, and we do not invest ourselves and become part of each other's lives, not out of nosiness or shared interest or even obligation, but out of love, then our faith will be contagious as well, I think, and everyone's should grow. And not only do my brothers and sisters give me courage, but they give me the motivation not to disappoint. I don't want to discourage, to be a stumbling block, and gives me another reason to stay the course and endure. And I pray daily that I'll be an encouragement and of service, that I'll find ways to be of service. And understanding that my faith is not tied to anyone else's, I understand that I'm going to stand on my own at judgment, and I'm going to be judged for my own faith and my own actions and the things that I've done in my own life and my own motivations. But if I don't allow myself to be influenced by those who are also faithful, then I do believe I've missed one of God's greatest blessings. And we talked about, when we were talking about having our feet shod with the gospel of peace, that we can't love each other properly if we're not invested in each other's lives. And certainly that leads itself to opportunities to teach, which have helped me increase my focus. And I talked to a young woman recently who was saying, I just can't get to the ladies' Bible class that we have at our congregation because it's at 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings and I'm working. And I said, well, then start another one. Take that on. And whoever can come will come. And those things, because for me, those things have been pivotal to my growth, taking the chance. And I believe those can be pivotal in other people's lives too. It makes you study in a way that you might not study otherwise. Now, that's not to say that my faith has never been challenged. It has. Small congregations have lots of opportunities to work, but they can also be exhausting and they can be discouraging. I think at one point before we moved to Darmstadt, there were 5 of us left in Mainz. And I can remember coming to America in the summer and thinking, okay, I've got 5 Sundays to soak it all in, to store it up, to last me another year, just to get through the year, just to endure. And in those times, finding ways to serve and keep yourself revived and restored, or it can be difficult, and it's just a lot of prayer and a lot of focus. And if you find yourself in a hard situation, you have to determine that you're gonna do the best you can. You will not fix a bad situation by saying, well, this is just a bad situation and there's nothing I can do about it. We have to find other ways to keep ourselves involved and faithful. And like you said, Elizabeth, in Psalm 16 and Psalm 31, God preserves the faithful. If we lean on him, if we know where to go when we are discouraged, when we're in pain, when we're suffering, then he's going to revive us, and he'll do it again and again and again. But endurance isn't easy when you feel alone and cut off. It's another reason to stick together, I think. But we have to decide that we're going to overcome whatever obstacles are presented, whether that's in a worship service, getting to a worship service, or being present at social fellowship. Again, we do what we want and we go where we want, and we will move heaven and earth to go to a concert or a movie that we want to see. But if there's a Bible class across town, then there's just too much traffic, and that's just not going to work for us in our schedules. And so we have to look at our priorities as well. And finally, yeah, I am the oldest of the people responding, not of the people on the line. But I do think that as we age, one of the things that helps our faith is that we can look back on our lives and see God's faithfulness to us. I can see so clearly providence that God has worked out to provide at certain points in my life, and that revives and restores my faith when we can see and acknowledge that God sees and hears our prayers and that he answers us. And how could I do anything other than follow the one who's been so good to me? How could I doubt him? And again, if you think back to Matthew 8, Elizabeth, you wrote about the centurion, someone being someone you would have liked, and partly it's his great faith that he's not a Jew, and yet he understands that all Jesus needs to do is speak. He says, look, I command people to go, and I understand all you need to do is command. And
we may have lost her. She was right in the middle of her thought. But that's right. I don't know that she may have to get off and come back in. I'm not sure. Maybe if we turn our cameras off, she'll come back. Let's see. No. Okay. Well, to finish up here, that's right. And I will say this, I think, and Lee alluded to this and actually spoke to this, and that is, it's like a language. If it's not used, it doesn't grow. If it's not something that is used in your life and functioning and you're engaged in using in your life, it'll go away. You'll forget it. You forget your faith. If you haven't thought about God in a while and you haven't been a relationship with him and you haven't been praying and you haven't been reading his words, frankly, when the darts do come, you've just forgotten. You've forgotten how to use it. It doesn't come to your mind. You're not thinking about it. And so I do think that that's, Lee talked a little bit about that. And I think that is exactly right. That as you get older, the more you use your faith, the more you can look back on it, and the more you know that he has been responsible for that preservation, whether he interacts to preserve or whether faith just preserves. I don't know how that works, but certainly it is a true concept. Well, thanks, ladies. I appreciate everybody being on the line, and we will look forward to our next roundtable. We're going to start our new month. It's hard to believe we're coming up on the end of June. So appreciate it, and I hope that everybody is tuning in. Make sure you go to the website. Lots of In the Trenches, new articles, and hopefully some new Bible classes coming out pretty soon. So, all right, we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you.
Huh.